Hey, welcome to Write More Light. My name is Sarah with Midwest Writing Center, and today we are talking with one of the leaders, directors of a local press. We don't have a lot of local presses here, so it's kind of a big deal. And more importantly, or maybe more uniquely, this press is a specialty press. We have with us Wordsy woman Jodie Toohey of Legacy Book Press, and that is a press specifically dedicated to memoirs. Thank you for being here, Jodie.
Thank you for having me.
And I think I'm going to dive into what I think is going to be the most revealing question, which is why memoir?
Because I like personal stories, just true stories that, to get them out in the world. I think that a lot of times reality is more interesting than fiction. And I don't even read much fiction anymore because it seems like it follows like a formula kind of. And so, yeah, I just like personal stories, and that's why I focus on them.
Well, how do you, I mean, seems probably like an obvious answer, but it wasn't to me. I have no idea how to determine like what memoirs to read. And in my personal life, this is not anything you asked for. But I found, I'll be reading a celebrity's memoir and I'll be like, wow, this is super boring. This is just a person. And then like Elaine's book, I'm just sobbing on every fifth page. So I guess how do you find your authors? How do they find you? Will be part, A of the next question.
Okay. Well, I have a listing in on Poets and Writers as a traditional publisher. They have some stringent requirements that you have to make to be a traditional publisher and be listed. So that's how some find me. I ran an ad in Poets and Writers magazine, I think, for about 6 months last year. That gets me quite a few. And then I think some of it is just word of mouth. If someone knows someone who has, a book that with me, they'll refer them, or if they happen to have read a book and they have a story, they'll contact me that way. Yeah, I don't really ask for sure where they all come from. They come from different places, but yeah, I get at least a couple of week submissions. So
that is a lot.
They're coming in. Yeah.
I mean, I guess I don't know what other people deal with, but a couple of weeks seems like a lot to me. I mean, MWC Press only accepts submissions once a year,
right?
More or less.
Right.
And we're much smaller. Obviously, we publish 5 books a year max.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my only experience working with publishing. So 2 a week sounds like a lot. What's the process like then to determine which you go forward with?
On the website under my submission guide, like my number one thing that I kick them down before is if they don't follow directions, which is probably about half of the submission I get. They do not follow directions, which is very irritating. I think it's a very clear submission process on my website. I have a questionnaire you fill in. I ask you to email me a PDF of your whole manuscript. So that's the number one thing. And then the number two thing I look at is the questionnaire, kind of just how I ask about like an elevator pitch and some synopsises and things like that to see, how well they know their book, basically. So that's what I first go off of. And then I read a few pages of the manuscript, like the first couple chapters, and I have an evaluator. She has a degree in English and is getting into publishing. So I have an evaluator that I send most of them to read, and then she gives me her notes. And so that's what I base the publishing on. And it also is a little bit on marketing. Like, I don't require authors to have like a huge platform and a really detailed marketing plan, but I'm just looking for us to have the willingness and some ideas. If someone I've gotten a couple of, there's like, oh, I'm not going to do any marketing at all. And then, that's obviously, I'm not going to accept that. But yeah, so that's really it's just a willingness to kind of do the marketing, not anything like they have to have a huge platform, anything like that. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And I want to say, every time I talk to anyone who takes any kind of submissions, that's for, a small online magazine or an anthology or a scholarship, the very first thing everyone does is, did you follow directions? So, well, I would think that people would be more careful about that. But
yeah.
certainly always worth reminding folks that if you can't follow directions, you're not going to move forward.
Right. And it's just not, for me, for a smaller press, it's not, I know the bigger presses, they use the directions as just, they get so many, it's a way to weed out ones they don't want to publish as if they don't follow directions. And it's kind of that with me. But for me, it's more like, if you can't follow directions, I don't think that I'm going to be able to work with you, because I'm pretty much a stickler for that. And once in a while, if a person, it sounds like they might have an interesting book or something, I will reply and say, hey, go, follow the submission guidelines. But mostly I have a folder called queries not following directions. So maybe one day if I get low on submissions, I'll go back and reply to those. And then if people follow up in a few months and I find out, it's like, well, I didn't accept it because you didn't follow directions. So if you want to go and try again, I'm be willing to look at it.
I think that's a good way of looking at why directions are important. But it's also like, in my mind, I would think this is the most important thing I'm doing right now. I want everything to go in my favor. So there are times when you mess up on accident, obviously.
Right.
But if I'm doing that and I'm not being careful, I see that as already like, how dedicated to this am I to begin with? So yeah, if I'm just like too stubborn to follow directions, I'm probably hard to work with. But I assume that if someone has a full length manuscript, it's been a huge part of their life and their heart. So I would assume that they would be delicate with it. And part of being delicate with right.
Right, exactly.
Is going through the process. So to me, it feels like they're not taking it as seriously as I am.
Yeah. And sometimes it's, so, if they fill out the questionnaire and they'll send a doc, a Word document instead of a PDF, then I'll say, can you send a PDF? But, if they don't even bother to like even answer the questionnaire, or if they're pitching me a fantasy novel, it's like, those are like, those are easy answers.
Yeah. Sorry, not what we do here.
Right.
Anyway, so part B of that question is, so the first part was, how do you determine who to move forward with, who to pursue? Part B of that question is, what kind of stories excite you? You said personal stories, but everyone has a different life.
Right. Yeah. I guess the ones I'm really drawn to are things that have to do with mental health or brain illness, things like that. Veteran type stories excite me. Bereavement, grief stories, a lot of things that I've kind of faced in my life or have touched my life. Those are the kind of the stories I gravitate to. But I also like career stories. I like to hear how people got from one point to the other in their career, because my career has been like all over the place. But and I'm really drawn to stories that have like a message, like especially with mental health and just trying to reduce the stigma of mental illness and brain illness, stuff like that. So that's mostly what my books that I published have been about. The addiction is one that I gravitate toward too.
Yeah, I suppose it was kind of a silly question, right? because I mean, how do you know what's gonna excite you until you see it too? Like
Right.
we all have our like our passion areas,
Hmm.
but it's also, you just you don't know. I don't know.
Right.
That's kind of an unfair question of me to ask. I'm sure that, well, in the same way that everyone has a story, I'm sure that there are lots of things that maybe look boring on the outside that are
Yeah.
very rich once you
Right.
get into them.
It may be an easier way to look at it as stories I don't like. And it's not really the stories, but there are elements that I veer away from, like purely political, you know, political view type things. Not if it has a personal story, but not just like why I'm this or why everyone should do this or whatever, things like that. I don't enjoy. I do enjoy history, so if that's part of it, that's fine. But I don't. I have my submission guidelines. I don't necessarily reject like graphic, sexual, or violent type things as long as it's germane to the story, like if it's important to the story. But sometimes even it doesn't have to be that, you know, that graphic, so I can tone it down. Same with like swearing. I don't not take swearing, but it has to be, essential to the story. One thing that I will not do is I will not accept any manuscripts that take a casual view of substance abuse or substance use. Obviously, I do the stories about it, but it has to be they made a mistake or how it was bad. Like, because I've had some that they treat it pretty casually, and that's just not what I want to publish.
I get that. I get that. I think that I have those same tendencies, I I don't know how to say this. I'm gonna have to try to be really vague about what I'm saying, but I was recently in the 11th hour called to Judge Iron Pen,
Okay.
and there was a piece that I didn't like personally, but it was objectively really good. And that
Mm-hmm.
was a source of conflict for me. And I think that, as I understand what you're saying, and the way that I would feel if I were running a publication would be, if the piece has potential to cause harm, I would feel uncomfortable publishing it. And sometimes talking very casually about things that are very dangerous can have a dangerous effect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not just substance abuse, but it can be any substance use, right?
Right.
Or disordered eating, or I'm sure even like accidental fat shaming, which comes up a lot just in the world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
I think at best I would ask to reframe things. Depends. I generally my rule would be, if you have to ask them to change something, you don't like it how it is.
Right. Yeah.
But I think I'm with you that if it has the potential to hurt someone, then you're probably not going to move forward with it.
Right. Right. And it's just too, if it's, I know for the Iron Pen you're judging for someone else, so it's you kind of have to take their values. But if it's your own publication or publishing company, you get to, it's your values. So if those are your values, that's your right. And sometimes it is not like, it's not the writing or the story is really good. It's just, kind of too casual about your your drug use, So
I'm also sort of the flip side of that coin. Um I'm reviewing a manuscript from a felon right now who's incarcerated currently.
mm,
And his story is, he hopes, a cautionary tale, a guidebook for how to not do what he did. Because he said, in his own words, he says, I grew up in a happy home. I didn't have, my parents were there, my parents were kind, nobody hit me, whatever these stereotypes we have in our head.
mm-hmm.
And so he wants it to be clear, he wants it to be a vehicle for teaching. So he's writing this, and of course, we write our own stories because we need to express them first and
Mm-hmm.
foremost. That's my opinion. I suppose other people may have other reasons. But his hope is that by seeing that this can happen to anyone, that it won't happen to everyone. And I think that's really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
Which is the flip side, right, of being too casual. You can also be cautionary.
Right, exactly. And those are the kind of stories I gravitate to more, because that has a lot to do with too with reducing the stigma of brain illness, things like that. Because the book I just came out a month or so ago, The Tree You Come Home To, it's kind of a similar story. The author, it's a memoir, and the author, her son was murdered, and he had some substance abuse use problems and mental health issues, but they were the same thing. It's like they, even she writes about how she was told many times by doctors and social workers, like, oh, you're not the typical family that we see, so that's
Probably
kind of,
so harmful to have
yeah,
a stereotype you're married to like that.
yeah. So that's one of the reasons that book appealed to me too, is because I want to show it doesn't, there's no like formula for for guaranteeing you're going to have any kind of problems or not.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm really enjoying this. I definitely have already told this gentleman about Legacy Book.
Oh, good.
I don't know if enjoy is the right word, but like it brings me joy to know that this story exists for an audience,
Yes, exactly.
I'm
Yep.
not saying it's like a painless experience, but
Right. Yeah, no, that sounds like a really good story.
yeah, it's really cool. I'll go back to my pre-established questions. How did you decide to start a press in the first place?
Well, I've always kind of been interested in publishing. I was one of those kids who made like little newsletters and tried to hawk them to the neighbor kids, like
Love that.
with the puzzles and little stories. So I've always been interested in that. And of course, I published my own book, so that got me into it a little later. But I actually started like publishing others' works more when I was partnered with Rory Perkins in 918 Studio Press. And at the time I was finishing my MBA degree, and the previous owner of the press, she kind of gave it to Lori. And so as a business type person, I was very interested in, what are your goals? What are your plans? Things like that. And so she asked me if I wanted to be a partner. So we did, and we did that for a couple of years. And then the last year, it was just me. She was too busy, so she got out of the partnership. But during that time, that's when I decided I wanted to focus more on the personal stories. And so that's when I decided to start the Legacy Book Press, which I did in January 2020 was the official beginning.
Really?
So, yeah.
I knew that 918 and Legacy Book were a couple, just from the conference,
Right.
But I didn't know that background, and I love that it's so organic.
Yeah, it kind of was.
I feel like that seems so obvious now. I mean, I didn't know any of the details, but like, of course it happened, gradually and then suddenly.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
that's from The Sun Also Rises from Hemingway, and it's about going bankrupt, but I think it's almost always relevant. How did it happen? Gradually and then suddenly.
Right, exactly. That makes perfect sense.
I always kind of feel guilty when I quote something. I think I have to credit it, but that one's always in my head. I think it's relevant to health and career and love and
definitely, yeah. I like that.
Well, that's cool. And I get, like, I identify with that. I think is part of the reason that it seems so organic. Like I absolutely jump on any opportunity to be involved with publications. So if somehow a press ended up in my lap, I would be like, obviously this is my role.
Right.
Anyway, well, I was hoping for maybe a simpler segue, but I'll just go with it. So can you tell me, I know it's been a lot longer than Legacy Book Press, but can you tell me about Wordsy Woman?
Sure. So yeah, that's kind of like my alter ego. It's more of services. Yeah, that's the same thing, and kind of gradually and suddenly too. I like that. It does work for everything. But yeah, so I was a paralegal for quite a few years, and then in January of 2010, I decided to go out on my own. My intention was to do freelance paralegaling and writing, but the freelance paralegaling didn't work out. So I concentrated in the morning on the writing. And then I did my MBA degree too. And one of the classes was a leadership class. And we kind of explored what we did and our purpose. And I figured out my purpose was to help people say what they want to say. And a Wordsy woman just came to me. I think it was, I went to a PR network conference where the name tag guy, I don't know if his name's Scott something, was a keynote speaker. And I don't know, just laying in bed that night, the Wordsy woman came to me. And so I kind of went with it, and it kind of evolved. I did some copywriting, and then eventually it evolved to more of like an author services type thing, which I still do. Not so much anymore, but it's still available. Editing, developmental editing, and I'm working with a couple of people on more like a mentor coaching thing where they send me what they write and I help them develop it. But yeah, so that's me, Wordsy woman.
Well, I know before I had met you, I was following, maybe it was you, maybe it was Wordsy Woman on socials, because you post like writer specific inspirational quotes, and you talk about I don't know how to say this, like logical aspects of writing, which I think if you get too into, maybe not too into, but if you get really deep in the weeds in the literary community, you get a little, you have the potential to go too hard into the abstract.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of, it was both a surprise and sort of refreshing. But I didn't know it had sort of dropped off, but I imagine part of that would be that the press started and that your services were necessary there.
Right, exactly. And I still have my Wordsy Woman website, so I'm still like available for those things. I'm focusing more on promoting the publishing company. I still do those quotes on Instagram, and I share them on the other platforms too. And right now I'm on the second round, so pretty soon I have to start coming up with some more original quotes. But I use I use photographs that I take, and then I put quotes, inspirational quotes. A lot of them writing focused, like you said. And then share them on Wednesdays. It's Wordsy Women Wednesday writing wisdom, stuff like that.
I had wondered, and I wasn't going to ask, but I'm glad to know that you take those pictures. I wondered where they came from, because they're very like serene.
Yeah, I like landscape photos. The vast, I think there's a couple that I got on stock photos. One I stole from my sister-in-law, but almost all of them, except for maybe a handful, I've actually taken myself. So
I have a few pictures that have come into my life, right? If I took them, or if they're art by someone I know, and I'm occasionally like, can I use this for work?
Yeah.
So far, it hasn't worked out, which is a huge bummer to me, because I think that they're still really great for my purposes.
Right.
That's not relevant. Okay, let's look at my paper. Okay, so let's talk about your most recent and upcoming publications.
Okay.
Can you tell me about your most recent publication?
My most recent publication is A Place to Rest by Tom Miller, and he is a Quad Cities author. He helped with the Children's Lit Fest for several years. And it's a little bit different than what I've published. Just to let you know, if there's a local author, I'm a little bit more like giving, I guess. I'm like, move their submissions to the top of the pile to look at, and I'm a little bit more lenient on how personal it is, and so I would say his is more historical fiction, but he lived in Alabama during the period of which the book takes place. It takes place in the civil rights era in Alabama, the Wiregrass region. and it's told through letters between two best friends and through like written newspaper articles and things like that. So it's kind of how these two women, their lives and other things happen in their lives, of course, and how the civil rights movement, how they felt about it and saw it and dealt with it, I guess. And yeah, so it's a little different because it's not a memoir, it's fiction, but it's still very personal because it takes place where he grew up and in the period he grew up in too, so in that area.
I'm really pleased to hear that you well, maybe I shouldn't, like maybe this is for some reason bad, but I'm really pleased to hear that you give some preference to local literature, something that I'm looking forward to and planning maybe in the end of the maybe at the words are hard today, maybe in late 2022. But I really want to do a panel on why we should read local. And so that, knowing that someone who isn't me, someone who isn't a bookseller or a librarian, because those are previously the people I've talked to the most about this, cares is really exciting. And to have a publisher that specifically cares about our community is really heartening for me.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, it's just like anything else. Local's good, as whether it's the restaurant or a brewery or just a store. So it's the same thing with authors. They're just kind of a little bit more hidden in the background because you don't, they're not quite so visible. But yeah, I definitely like local.
I think that you said that in a way that really helped me because it's something I don't think I could answer on my own. And I've talked about this a lot. Forgive me if you've heard me babble on before. But one of my goals is to read local, and it's sort of a combo goal. It's read, within like 2 degrees of my social circle, read local, and read outside my comfort genre.
Okay.
But the way you phrased it, with it being the same as a brewery or a restaurant, a coffee shop, was really helpful to me in my brain because I was like, yeah, we talk about shopping local because we're keeping the local economy in our minds and in our hearts because this is where we live. So this is where we love. And I think one of my favorite quotes is, "The truth about stories is that's all we are." That's Thomas King from the book, The Truth About Stories. And that's so, even, I mean, with the economy in mind, because the economy is always at mind, our stories are at least as important, or if not more, and understanding and knowing and learning the stories of our community must have a profound impact on us as human beings. Thinking now about Ben Miller.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Who was sort of a surprise to me to read.
Yeah.
For folks who don't know, Ben Miller grew up in the Quad Cities, is now a very successful writer out in the world, and he was our keynote speaker at the Collins Writers Conference a few years ago.
Yeah, I actually got his book kind of by accident. I was just looking at the local rack at Barnes and Noble, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then I start reading. I'm like, oh my gosh, I know those people. I know Rochelle. I know that was right there.
Yeah.
So he was like actually the first author I actually wrote, but he didn't take email. I had to write him a snail mail letter, which is kind of fun.
I love that. That doesn't surprise me. I love that. I used to sort of make fun of writers who would put lots of like local landmarks in their books. And now it just gives me such a thrill. I read a book recently that took place in Philadelphia, and I've only been to Philadelphia once. So it was just for a few days. But I was like, yes, I know what you're talking about. And it made me very happy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it brings you into the story for sure, to know, like, even if it's fiction, it's based on a real place, I think if you know it, it helps you imagine it a little better, kind of makes it a little bit,
Yeah,
closer
it's
to
like I'm
home.
part of it. Like maybe I'm an
Yeah,
extra, but I'm there.
right, exactly.
Um, so what's your next release then?
The next release is it's called Lessons from the Mountain, and it's fiction too, but it is based on the authors. It's autofiction, autobiographical fiction, and it's a family story. So it's told from the three daughters and then the mother's point of view. The father's going through some mental health issues, and then it's just the daughters, they're kind of dealing with that and their own lives and each other. And it's and it kind of, I guess it kind of came to fruition because the family gets together in the Adirondack Mountains, and that's kind of where I guess where she got the idea. But yeah, so that's the next one in July, and then there's a little bit of a break, and then just some of the other ones I have. Amtrak Lullaby, the author,
What
it's
a
a memoir.
title.
Yeah, I love that title. Her husband passed away, and she found out after he passed away that he was a high functioning alcoholic. And so she decides to go on an Amtrak trip. She goes from out east all the way to California and back. So it's kind of about her trip and about, coming to grips with, her husband's death and what she found after. So that's one. There's Goodbye Again. That is a memoir where the author gave her son up for adoption, and then 23 years later they found each other, but he passed away shortly thereafter. So that's her story. Another one, White Flag. That is the author's experience with her niece who is an addict. So that's her memoir about that. And that her previous book, her name Jodie Mendel, and her previous book, Replacement Child, was on the New York Times bestseller list. And it's kind of interesting too. I just read it, but so in 1952, before she was born, an airplane hit her parents' house in 1952 in New Jersey, I believe, and it killed one of her sisters, and it severely disfigured her other sister. And so, but she was not born until a few years later. And the idea was she was kind of a replacement child, because if it hadn't been for this other, she wouldn't have been born. So that's really interesting. And then it's the niece is the daughter of, her other sister who was disfigured, her experience with her. So yeah, got quite a few.
You have so much coming down the,
Yeah.
I don't know that phrase. Coming down the line. Yeah. Pipeline.
Yeah. And yeah, I have several other ones too. Another more local author is, she lives in Iowa City. Suze McCracken. Her book is about the Quaker. It's kind of cool. It's double time, so it's present day and historical, and it's basically these group of friends get together as Quakers, and they decide to research historical Quaker women, and so it has that in it. So it's kind of like, it reads kind of like a parable to me. So it's really interesting.
Is it kind of dark?
It's not really, no. It's not dark.
I read something, not about Quakers, but I read something recently about women in Amish communities that I had to take breaks from.
Oh yeah.
It got dark.
Yeah. This is kind of like their what these historical Quaker women, how they change and how they call it be the church. It just helps, equality and things like that. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I wish I could spend all the time in my day reading. I did that, for a couple of weeks at the beginning of the pandemic. It was, mostly escapism, but also my favorite thing to do. And
Right.
I read so many books and I was like, who knew I could do this?
Yeah, I don't know who it was, but I was listening to it's kind of a course on books, like historic books, or books that have an impact. And I can't remember what author it was. And he talked about how this author, they took 10 years off to basically just read. And I'm like, that sounds fabulous. Like,
how was that fun?
I'm not sure how he funded that. Maybe I don't know, independently wealthy or something. Like, man, that sounds wonderful.
A wealthy family member died.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Yeah.
I'll get off topic. I was like, I don't think I could ever stop working, but it's still working, right?
Right. Yeah. That's the great thing about being a writer. Reading is working.
Until you start to think of it that way, and then you have
Yeah.
Are there, okay, well, here, this will be a selfish question. Are you going to be taking pitches at the conference this year?
Yeah, it should be. I think, yeah, it should be
I was like,
around
if
for
not,
that.
that's a bad question for me to
No.
ask.
No, yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about, but yeah, I'm definitely willing to. I was on last year, but I don't think I got any. But
One of our
2 years ago, I did pitches, and I took Elaine Olson's book, My Walk with Grief, and that's another grief. Her husband passed away. He was a pastor, so it's really a good candid look at how she.
I haven't even finished it because it's so hard for me to read, and I felt so bad because I had her on there. I've had 2 opportunities to ask her questions now, but I had her on this show. But then I also saw her at the Artsy Bookworm when she did her reading there.
Yeah.
And both times I was like, I'm sorry, I can't finish your book, but it's really good.
Well, you see, it gets happier as you get past the middle, but yeah, so it gets a little bit lighter. Yeah,
that's also, it's definitely a show of talent that it is so impactful.
Yeah, and it's it's not just about her husband's death. It's about, it's probably more about finding her own identity, which
absolutely
I think a lot more people can relate to than just if your spouse passed away.
Absolutely.
Course, that's really
or breakups, or quitting a job, or losing a job.
Right. Yeah.
And
it's funny too, which you don't think a book with that subject would be funny, but there are funny parts, and especially when she talks about dating and getting out in the dating world after.
I'm really hoping she'll put out like a book of essays or vignettes or something about dating.
Oh, that would be awesome.
She's so funny when she talks about it. And like, I have no doubt that it's funny because she's funny.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't gotten there. I needed to take a break.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. I'm excited to know that you'll be taking pitches at the conference. One of our instructors has a memoir. Oh, I have it right here with me. Crazy, right? That all of the relevant books are next to me.
Yeah.
Toohey Renteria, his memoir, We Heard It When We Were Young, is out from University of Iowa Press.
Oh, cool.
So he is going to be taking there's a word for it, critiques. He'll be accepting manuscripts for critiques, so you can bring your manuscript to him and then pitch it to Jodie, and
all done in one shot.
all memoir all the time. I will say
right.
I know him personally. I'm very honored to know him. But he's one of the kindest people to receive feedback from, because he'll give you good feedback, but it won't hurt.
Right. Yeah. It's sometimes talent too.
Sometimes people don't have a lot of tact when they're telling you did something wrong, but with him, it's like a hug, and you're like, oh, that cracked my back. That's great.
Yeah, you feel supported. Yeah, I always tell people that you can give constructive criticism in a nice way, like a supportive way. It don't have to be like, this sucks. If you can do it nicely, it's possible, and people can do it really well.
But I would recommend this book specifically to you, not to this potential audience that's out there. It's so good. And it's also so I told you I'm never sure how to pick memoir, and I am definitely bad at picking what memoir to read. I don't know when it's going to be a good one, right?
Yeah.
And I would say
Yeah.
that this one is really interesting because it feels very much like you're going through his life with him. And to me, it feels like getting to understand how a memoir is written by reading it. So
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
That's really good. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of different because, I don't read too many celebrity memoirs. I did read Elton John's memoir recently, and it was really good. I was surprised at how open and candid and down to earth he was. It was a really good book to.
The look on my face is my nonfiction shelf is behind my computer, and I can't tell if I think my biographies are on the bottom, but I have essays on the top, and there's a lot of overlap there, in my
Oh
opinion.
yeah.
So that's what I was doing. But yeah, I have something in front of the biographies. I was trying to figure out which I may have read most recently. The last celebrity bio I read was Jonathan Van Ness,
Okay.
and they're like 30. No, I mean, they're very close to 30. So like, while there was a lot of drama in Jonathan Van Ness's life, it was also like, all right, well, you're my age, like it's not that exciting. Why do you have a memoir?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's written very
Well,
conversationally because, I mean, if you watch Queer Eye, you know how Jonathan talks.
mhm.
And it's written that way, which makes it really easy to read, but it's also like childhood and then career. And I just,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
there's a lot
Well,
of
there's
cool
a difference
people,
too. Like you can tell pretty easily if a celebrity
right?
actually has a story to tell, or they just wrote a memoir because they're a celebrity and it will sell.
This one felt more like a PSA in book form.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Jonathan Van Ness is HIV positive and has been involved in with substance abuse and commercial sexual exploitation, and so there are some really hard stories in there.
Mhm.
But I think, and I read it in a day, like I
Oh wow. Yeah.
read it.
Really good.
But I think to me it was like, oh right, of course there's no ending to this story. This person's my age, like.
Right. Yeah. That's just the first chapter of their story. Really.
um yeah, I don't I keep trying to say I don't read memoirs, but I obviously do. I really also, there's a woman in Iowa City, Annie Wilcox. She wrote a really great memoir on craft. And
Okay.
those are memoirs I like a lot when
Mhm.
they feel more like essays to me because they're dual topic. It's
Right.
me and subject. And that was on bookmaking,
Oh, okay.
which is really interesting. I'm sure it's out of print. Because I think it was a specialty press that printed it. But it was really cool. I didn't mean to just start talking about books I
No, it's
read,
good.
but
Sounds
my
good.
next question was going to be outside of your own press, because I imagine that that's an uncomfortable way to have a conversation. Are there any memoirs that you just love?
Trying to think.
Obviously, you can talk about your own publications, but that seemed like choosing your favorite child, probably.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't know. I've read. I sometimes have a hard time. Like, what did I read? Like, it's actually published, and what have I read? Like,
Yeah.
which one was it? But yeah. I don't know. I guess. Like, yeah. I read Elton John's recently. I'm reading one now. It's called The Art of Disappearing, I think, and it's kind of the author. The author is, and as part of her, I think, a master, she's writing about. I can't remember what her name is, but it's an author who started like young, but she ran away, and then so this it's kind of like her study of how this other person ran away, that she wants to run away, and things like that. So it's pretty interesting.
Sorry. um for folks who don't know why I'm laughing, I had to make hand signals at my door. Yeah, that's cool. I used to work at Barnes and Noble, and I would always be really excited to be at the this was in Iowa City, so the layout's different.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the checkout counters was in the memoir section. And this is totally probably not allowed, but when it was slow, I would read.
There you go.
I mean, I never, if like I was a fine employee. I don't know who I'm trying to comfort with this information, but it was really cool because sometimes I'd be like, yeah, I want to know what Bryan Cranston has to say. And I think I read the whole first chapter, which is kind of, you don't have much time, right?
Right, yeah. Right.
But it was so compelling the way, because he knew, or his editor or whatever knew where to start the story, and started it in a really emotional, messy place, which of course grabs you right in and then makes you care. So the opening scene was filming an emotional scene of Breaking Bad, but we don't know that. He's just describing what he's going through physically and emotionally until he says cut or whatever.
Yeah.
And then let's see, I know Becoming came out when I worked there, and I read the first page of that, but there was one, and I wish I knew the title, because this is the reason I'm telling you this to begin with, about someone who lost her entire family in a tsunami.
Oh, wow.
And watched it. They were on vacation, maybe.
Okay.
This was not an American author, and it was not an American tsunami. That would be probably something we would be aware of.
Yeah.
And it was just, I mean, I was like choked up on the second page, because it opens with her watching this wave come toward her in her hotel room. And I didn't even read it. I couldn't imagine going through that.
No.
Yeah. But I want to. I'm still thinking about it, 3-4 years later.
Yeah, those kind of survival type stories are really, it's amazing what the human body and mind will do to survive.
Which is all, of course, to say that everyone has a story. I mean, it doesn't have to be dramatic as losing your entire family in a tsunami.
Right. Right.
But if you met Chewie, you would be like, that's a guy over there. And then, of course, if he sees this, he's gonna be like, good job, Sarah. But you don't know by looking at someone what their story is. And I think that's probably what makes memoir so exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think it's important, I think it's important for people to have their story down in whatever way that works best, even if they're not like publishing it. It's, for their family, and, because that stuff gets lost, and then you don't know your history. And so, yeah, I think it's good, even if you're not going to commercially publish it, to have something about your life to pass down.
I have talked to a couple MWC members about this, about how their families might be uncomfortable with them trying to publish their story, but I have no doubt. Well, one, if you want to write your story, it needs to be written. That's a personal stance that I will not back down from. But also, they're going to be really grateful. They're going to be really grateful. And it sucks to say it, but they're going to be really grateful when you're gone.
Right.
And I have huge regrets for not sitting down with any of my grandparents. Which, you don't know as a kid.
Right. Yeah. You just don't. And yeah, you always think you have time, but it runs out. But yeah, so so your grandkids probably not going to come up to you, ask you questions. So you just got to be proactive and write it down anyway. One day they'll look for it, and they'll be so glad that they have it.
And it's not like egotistical to do that.
No.
They're going to want to know your story as much as you want to know your parents' story. Like,
right. Especially like now, like the times is like,
so much has changed.
Yeah, so much has changed, and people, I don't, if you're writing a memoir, fiction, or whatever, if you're writing something based in 2020, you have to, unless it's a completely fantastic, fantasy type story, you have to address the pandemic. And you can't like say, my friends and I went, it was like, April 2020. You can't say, I went out with my friends to dinner, because you wouldn't have, because it was, you couldn't have, and I think, unfortunately, I think with, Ukraine and everything, that's going to be a backdrop too for.
Mhm.
I hope it doesn't get as big as a genre like World War II, but you never know.
I read a book recently and it took place in 2001. And I was like, I swear, if this is a 9/11 book, and
Right.
it was.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't, that's not what made or break the book, made or broke the book. But you see 2001 and 9/11 is coming. It's
right.
just
Yeah.
inevitable.
Yeah. Even if it's not about that, it's still a part of. It's still a part.
I mean,
of
it took place in New
colors
York,
thing.
so.
So yeah, that for sure. Yeah.
Well, I have a couple more questions, but I
Okay.
am low on time with you. Well, how about this? Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would just like to add too about the Legacy Book Press. Like we talk a lot about memoir, but my focus is expands beyond just my memoir. So that's why I call it personal story. So I obviously publish memoir, but I publish autobiographical fiction, poetry, or like even a combination, like stories. It's I define personal broadly. So just if anyone's thinking of, if you have something that's personal, it's not a memoir, it's still something I'm interested
Thank you for clarifying that. I meant to actually ask about that when I brought up memoir on craft, because I have a hard time in my own head discerning a lot of the time between essays and memoir, because essays are my favorite. And like White Magic by Alyssa Wishuda says essays on the front, but it's really one story.
Okay.
And it's in chunks. There's different sections, they're numbered, but it's definitely just one story. So maybe better classify. I mean, I'm not, it's on like Tin House or something. They definitely know what they're doing. But I might classify it as memoir. So I was going to ask about that intersection and how you, as a publisher, feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if it's personal, it's personal. It doesn't matter. It can be short stories, essays, one whole book. It can be, like I said, poetry. Yeah, anything is personal, and there's degrees of personal too. That's one of the questions I ask when people submit is, if it's not a memoir, how much a percentage is the personal? 25%, 50%, 70%. And so that kind of factors in. Obviously, the more personal it is, the more interested I'm going to be. But I have published ones that say 25% personal. It just depends on how the personal part works into the story or the book.
That's good to know, and really heartening too, because I feel like sometimes genre lines can be very exclusive, but I don't, in my heart, feel like they should be. So it's really nice personally to hear. Is there anything else you want to add?
I think so.
Okay. Well, then I will give my little spiel on what's coming up at the Midwest Writing Center. Of course, we've already mentioned the Collins Writers Conference. That's June 23rd through 25th.
That sounds right. Yeah.
I didn't bring my calendar today.
That's right. Yep.
In which you first, we have a couple of scholarships available for financial hardship or I want to say military experience. And our keynote speaker, which is so exciting, I am out of my mind excited, is Ross Gay, author of lots of books of poetry, this book of essayettes, the Book of Delights, the Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. These are both like massive award winners. Let's see. Yeah, the one I'm holding, the poetry book, it was a National Book Award finalist. It won the National Book Critics Circles Award. It won the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award. But Ross Gay, the author of these books, also has collaborative work with other artists and an album of music, spoken word work. So that's going to be the biggest, most exciting, to the layman, name on our list. And the keynote address is free. The masterclass is free if you're registered for the conference. The other stuff that we have, of course, I already mentioned, Toohey Renteria will be I know I talk really fast during this part. We'll be teaching on memoir. We have Gina Franco teaching on poetry. We have Latanya McQueen teaching novel writing, and Jennifer Colville on the short story. It is a really, really good group. Of course, I believe it's my job to have read all of these people before I start forcing them on people, because I want to be able to say, this is why this matters. And luckily, or maybe just by virtue of that being my interest, I can say confidently, this is going to be really good. Other things we have coming up, we're coming up, April is National Poetry Month. So in collaboration with Dead Poets Espresso in Moline and the Moline Public Library, we will be featuring on display in these two public spaces poems by you. Submit a poem fewer than 30 lines to midwestwritingcenter@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to get it on display. That's it. Like that's we ask for slightly more info. All the info, of course, is on our socials at MWC_QC or on our website, mwcqc.org. But that's the base. That's the basics. Send us your poem. We'll put it out there. In conjunction with that, we're hoping to have a couple of readings of the folks who are going on display. Of course, if you don't want to read, you don't have to, but it's also a really cool opportunity to get your work out in the world. On April 23rd, we will have a Crash on Flash. That's a crash course on Flash fiction with Audra Kerr Brown, who is a big name in the Flash world. Flash fiction, which can also be autofiction or nonfiction, is a really hot genre right now. And all it is little bitty stories. But due to their brevity, there's a lot of complication, a lot of nuance that goes into writing them. So having someone who is such an expert and important figure in Flash fiction teaching on that is going to be really, really incredible. We're taking applications for the Great River Writers Retreat. Send us your memoir if you're in the 6-state service area. The states are also on the website. I don't know them off the top of my head. And you'll be considered for this week-long retreat at the Bennett House. And then the idea is that you will work on the piece that you submit to us, and then you'll headline a reading at the end of the residency. We are also taking applications for the Young Emerging Writers Internship. That's a paid internship for writers age 15 to 19. We work on and learn and practice workshopping, reading, writing, publishing, and compiling a book. So as anyone who has watched this show before knows, I was in that program when I was a teenager, and it's by far one of the best and most, my life was dramatically altered by that. Obviously, I wouldn't be here now if I wasn't there then. Okay, I'm out of breath now. As always, let's rewind. Jodie, thank you for hanging out with me. I hope that we can talk more when you've got your next publications coming out. Maybe I can talk with your authors.
That'd be great.
I have tagged Wordsy Woman and Legacy Book Press in the comments on the Facebook video. I highly recommend looking into Jodie's services and press. Those books are, if you're in the Quad Cities, and anything by Legacy Book Press I know is available at the Book Rack. I imagine a handful of those books are available at the Artsy Bookworm. And Jodie has a discerning eye. They're good. They're good publications, the ones I've read anyway. As always, dear friends, please write more light into your life.